Today's video is sponsored by NordVPN. Stick around for an offer that will get you 68% off a 2-year plan with 1 extra month free. Some people might have chosen to use the unexpected downtime of the last few months to learn a new language or musical instrument. Some have taken up carpentry or gotten absolutely jacked. My girlfriend and I, on the other hand, started a little project that saw us finally knuckle down and watch all of the Fast and Furious movies in the space of a couple of months. I'm sure you're all very proud of us. All in, this ended up being incredibly fun, seeing this franchise over a pretty condensed period of time turn from a plot about stealing DVD players, cashing in on early 2000s street racing culture, into this utterly wild, globe-trotting spy fiction thrill ride, as Vin Diesel and his beloved family work with shadowy government organizations to find omniscient tracking devices and stop sky fortresses from causing nuclear Armageddon by driving really fast, I guess. It's insane lore, absurd stunts, and white-knuckle set pieces retaining just enough of that self-serious boy racer drama to veer wholeheartedly into the realm of glorious schlock. And it was precisely this schlock that made the idea of playing recent release Fast and Furious Crossroads, newly equipped with this knowledge of the entire series, so utterly appealing to me. That announcement that saw Vin Diesel and Michelle Rodriguez pull the whole "We're Gamers Too" card at the Game Awards with such genuine earnestness that it transcended a lot of similar celebrity pandering at these kinds of shows. The gameplay reveal months later that looked more than a little crap, but crap in a very specifically campy way. Hell, when you see names like Asia Kate Dillon and Peter Goddamn Stormare in the credits, you realise that even beyond the cast of the films, they got some star power behind this thing. Despite the legion of people talking about how awful Crossroads looked, there was a part of me, a person who loves to take outwardly terrible releases and try to find the good in them, that was actually kind of excited to really get stuck into this daft, weird game. It was one of those titles that you can imagine was simply a means of making a quick buck releasing alongside the latest film, F9. Just another way to get the words Fast and Furious into people's mouths that they aren't going to scrutinise too deeply, right? But with F9 being pushed back to next year alongside, well, everything else, Crossroads has found itself in a fairly precarious but nonetheless fascinating situation. It's a promotional piece for a film that might as well not exist at this stage, crawling onto digital store shelves with zero fanfare to face the spotlight on its own, to be judged entirely on its own merits. And in that regard, said spotlight has not been kind to this game. I don't think anything could have prepared me for just how much of a disaster this thing is. Let me put it this way, I never ever thought I'd utter the phrase "power sliding under trucks was easier in Ride to Hell Retribution," but here we are. I'm really trying to rack my brain here, but for a franchise whose core has always revolved around driving fast cars, this might actually be the worst feeling car game I've ever come across. All in service of a story that really does its franchise no favours in just how boring and disjointed it all actually is. With the best thing I can say about it being that the 3 to 4 hours it'll take you to beat is at the very least mercifully short. But even then, as we'll come on to later, there are even problems with that. Truly, on every conceivable level, Crossroads is a catastrophic failure. It's hard to even know where to begin here. Down to the fundamentals, the simple act of rounding a corner in this game feels awful. The handling model sees every turn start with a few frames of moving slightly left and right before the car suddenly throws its goddamn back out and you end up in a drift that isn't really a drift. Instead, just continuing your car's path into the oncoming wall you were trying to avoid, just at a different angle. Getting around a corner unscathed seriously feels like a miracle as you otherwise attempt to regain what little control you have over your pinballing death machine. It is impossible to tell which small ridges you can drive over, which of the obstacles littering every part of the road you can plough through, versus the ones that will cause you to come to a juddering halt. That is, if the game's borderline broken technical state doesn't cause you to glitch through the floor instead. Said technical issues also extend to the abysmal AI, which, when it's not enemies giving up entirely on the notion of self-preservation, your allies constantly getting in your way, or the woefully limited police chase feature that sees cops lose your trail when you intentionally defy the game's warnings of leaving the ill-defined mission area, will see civilians becoming the most unhinged of the bunch as they somehow send each other flying across the screen without provocation. Top all of that off with the shakiest camera known to man, a brazen attempt to make the deceptively slow driving appear more more frantic than it actually is, while in reality making it nigh impossible to see what's actually coming your way amidst all the chaos, and you have one of the most sluggish, least readable racing games ever. But then, I don't know if I can even call Crossroads a racing game per se. There are a couple of straight up races in there, but whether you win or lose seems entirely dependent on the whims of the story. A good deal of the time then is actually spent driving along a straight path, sometimes boosting, ramming, hacking and firing your way towards bringing down the health bars of the occasional bosses in front of you, all while switching between different characters. And you might think, sure, that's potentially interesting, it's like a more strategically varied version of Burnout or something. The idea of each character handling a specific part of a multi-stage heist or rescue mission actually fits fairly well with how set pieces in the films tend to work. And, well, that might be the case if you were ever given any real choice as to how you pulled these encounters off. The game instead more or less dictating exactly who you're going to be at any given point, which highly specific ability is required for this part of the mission. Hell, even the Burnout comparison isn't particularly valid, as the grunts that attempt to distract you from the bigger task at hand operate with similar rigidity to the bosses. You're not trying to carefully judge the exact right point to throw the weight of your car at an enemy in order to send them cascading off the track. Even the more lowly enemies have health bars that drain at the exact same rate every time. Nudging does a set amount of damage, missiles do slightly more. You know, rather than feeling like a real forceful impact caused by your understanding of the game's physics, the whole thing turns into a game of painting by numbers, waiting for your ability timers to fill up so you can press the right button when the game tells you to in order that the story can keep going. It seems odd to describe a game like this as aggressively linear, but I really can't think of any other phrase for it. As I say, it's not a racing game, it's barely even a driving game honestly, feeling like it has more in common with a QuickTime event-driven interactive movie than it does, say, Split Second or something. But as that interactive movie, does it work? I mean, the Fast and Furious franchise ain't exactly Oscar-worthy. It's great because it's so dumb. Wouldn't it make sense for a gamified version of that kind of kitsch to be a little rough around the edges? It would if the game was at least exciting in its awfulness. When you find yourself driving a big slow truck up a hill for way too long, or engaging in an excruciatingly drawn-out tailing mission, or having to slow down to a crawl in order to hack a target thanks to the game's ridiculously bad lock-on system, you might think these are not the kinds of objectives that you want out of a Fast and Furious game. The way Crossroads has you engage in its pretty nothingy story is messy to say the least. Where the films would use a 5-second establishing shot to show you where the characters are, Crossroads has you driving along entirely uneventful roads for minutes at a time. Then, however, you'll get to HQ, be told that the crew needs to find a certain type of car, only to cut at whiplash-inducing speed to you having already broken into said car and being told to escape from wherever the hell you just transported to. In other words, they padded out precisely the sections that needed to be dramatically shortened, while flat out deleting scenes that would give you any context for what it is you're being told to do. It's not dissimilar to how a game like The Quiet Man failed to convey appropriate information to the player. This kind of unevenness makes itself apparent in the game's dialogue too, where Letty will say, "There's too many of them, they're too tough," and your character will somehow respond with, "Letty's right, we can take them." It sounds like there's lines missing or something. But even if you sort out the weird pacing issues and the like, it still leaves you with a pretty dire script plagued by worse delivery. You still get the occasional neat little reference to events from the films, with some of that hokey charm where characters that have shown no previous technical know-how will talk about how they just need to get closer to the signal so they can sneak past the mainframe like they're suddenly hacking wizards. But what Crossroads forgets is that as the films gradually moved in this more campy direction, they also introduced increasingly bigger personalities to go along with it. Vin Diesel, Michelle Rodriguez, and Paul Walker, God rest his soul, were suddenly accompanied by people like The Rock and Jason Statham, providing endless opportunities for one-upsmanship in the intensity of the quips and insults thrown. Here, thanks to delivery that sounds less like people gleefully shouting to be heard over the roar of engines, and more like they're quietly chatting around a table, lines like,
"I thought I was gonna hurl on the way up here,"
as you're escaping a dangerous rock slide, and
"Why don't you save us some time and tell us then?"
"Not even if you tortured me."
You know what's torture? Being stuck in a room with you.
really stick out like the clunkers they are. during my playthrough, it didn't strike me as some knowing attempt to evoke the juvenile, playful tone of the films, as much as it brought to mind that Bubsy game that came out a few years back.
Pilot's license? What for?
I hate to say this, but despite the star power behind it and the franchise the developers are working with, everything about Crossroads just feels so amateur, which makes it all the more genuinely shocking that this game was developed by none other than Slightly Mad Studios, the team that made Project Cars. Now, I've written about a lot of incredibly confounding games on this channel in the past, ones that have gotten me questioning the very foundations of the medium they're so bad, but this fact right here, that the developers behind one of the most robust, detailed racing simulators out there right now somehow managed to follow up with this, is honestly confusing me like very little else I've covered up to this point. Perhaps even more confusing than that, however, is the sheer cost of this thing. I don't normally talk about pricing in reviews because I don't necessarily believe that value is equitable to a game's length, but Jesus, this isn't a budget title. This isn't even full price. This 3 to 4 hour experience costs £50 or around $65. They are charging beyond full price for this. And what's more, there's a season pass for the online mode. Did I mention there was an online mode? Yup. And in order to get the most out of it, to get the cars and skins, I guess, they want you to pay, and I swear I'm not kidding here, £25. They want you to pay almost $100 to get the full experience out of this dross. But you know the worst part? The reason you're still seeing single player footage right now? I literally couldn't play it. Believe me, I tried. I tried for so long to get one match in this online mode, and at the time of writing, I just could not get into a game on PC. I couldn't tell you what this apparently crucial component of Crossroads is like because no one is playing it. The most I ever got in a lobby at one time was 3 people, myself included. And it's all of this stuff that really is the killer here, why I can't recommend even hardcore enthusiasts of crap games to check this one out. So far I've named Ride to Hell, The Quiet Man and Bubsy in comparison to Crossroads. This should be the gold standard of that specific kind of shite game that really needs to be played to be believed, but in actuality it's nowhere near as wacky or fun as those comparisons would suggest. What we have in our hands is a ludicrously expensive game that barely works, and worse, is just kind of boring to boot. I can barely tell you a single thing that happens in the plot. It's so forgettable, delivered so monotonously. Rather, it's the contextual stuff that's actually the shocker here. That after so long of tie-in games existing purely in the realm of cheap-to-make, free-to-play mobile time sinks, here we have a return to the full-blown console releases of yore, and lo and behold, it's as rubbish as that type of game ever was. But let me tell you about what's great instead. The sponsor of today's video, NordVPN. Say you're travelling and you want to access content from your home country, or you live in a country where the government censors which sites you can and can't access, which is an increasing concern for many in these wild times. Hell, you might have just heard about something on a streaming service you desperately want to watch, but it's only available to those in a specific region. With NordVPN, you can solve all these problems by connecting to one of thousands of servers in over 60 countries. With the help of NordVPN's lightweight and user-friendly Chrome browser, Android and iOS apps, all with unlimited bandwidth and up to 6 simultaneous connections, you can fully control your browsing experience wherever you are. And right now you can get 68% off a 2-year plan plus 1 additional month for free when you go to nordvpn.com/writing or use code WRITING at checkout. This special offer makes your subscription just $3.71 a month, is entirely risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee, and really helps the channel to boot. A massive thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring the video, and I really hope you enjoyed this piece on Fast and Furious Crossroads. As always, I'd like to sincerely thank my patrons here. I can't emphasize enough how crucial your support has been during this weird time to keeping the channel going. If you feel like you can, and only if you feel like you can really help the continued production of these videos, as well as get things like early access to entirely ad-free video uploads by heading to patreon.com/writingongames and pledging only what you feel comfortable with. I am immensely grateful for your support in whatever form it takes. Special thanks go to Mark B. Writing, Shardfire, Konstantinos Sakinis, The Nameless Guy, Artyom Vitsyuk, Dr. Motorcycle, Hibi Amori, Henry Milek, Hamigas, Dallas Keen, Lucas, Bryce Snyder, my dad, Timothy Jones, Anna Pimentel, Rob, William Fielder, Tommy Carver-Chaplin, Leah Chinello, David Björk, Justin Tolderness, and Charlie Yang. And with that, this has been another episode of Writing on Games. Thank you so much for watching, stay safe, and I will see you all next time.